Hello all, welcome to this first lunch break webinar. Today we're going to show you how to control a lighting installation using online weather information. My name is Bas Hoksbergen, I'm Architectural Market Manager at Pharos and I'll be your host today. I'll mainly be operating in the background and support where required. Today's webinar will be presented by Ryan Sainsbury, Technical Project Specialist at Pharos. The aim is to have 15-20 minutes of presentation and then a Q&A session afterwards to answer any possible questions. At the bottom of your screen, you'll find the Q&A button to ask a question, but you can also use the chat window to reach out to us or raise your hand if there's something you'd like to ask verbally. Let me start off with a quick poll to just see who's all out there. Let me find the right button to start at. You should see a pop-up on your screen. Those who are using the web, a browser will not see that, but the rest, I expect you are seeing something. Please feel free to reply. Have you ever used I/O modules? We're interested to learn if you did or did not use this before. And also in case you, well, maybe you're not hearing all of this, this might be an option for you to say you might encounter some issue. Let me give a little bit of time for people to reply to this. And yeah, majority of people have voted by now. So great, thanks you all for your votes. Thanks for your answer. I'm going to end the poll now. And with this, I'm actually going to hand over to Ryan, who will be take over the shared screen, and he will do the rest of the presentation. So let's get started.
Thank you very much, Baz. I'm just going to take control and share my screen. Hello, everyone. My name's Ryan. I work for Pharos Controls. I am the technical project specialist. I do various things within the company, but I'm mainly here as a technical resource for our customers and our clients. I help with lots of different things like programming, sometimes some custom web interfaces. And I also do training, which is leading on to today's webinar. So first of all, as Baz has already said, please give us some feedback at the end of the session. If you've got any questions and answers, please feel free to ask those at the questions. This is kind of a new thing for us, so of course any feedback that you could give would be much appreciated. So we're going to be looking at our I/O module framework today, and specifically we're going to be using the AccuWeather I/O module as an example. So I/O modules extend the functionality of Pharos by giving you extra triggers, conditions and actions, and specifically the AccuWeather I/O module is going to allow us to access an online service which is going to give us weather information, and depending on the weather information coming back, that will allow us to pick a different lighting scene or have some kind of actual routine run with the hardware. So we're going to be looking at this in three different parts. There's going to be just the I/O module basics. We're then going to just walk you through how you can set up a license for the AccuWeather service, because it's an external service to Pharos. And then finally, we're going to be looking at how you can then implement that into your show file. And of course, that will then enable you to use it in your programming. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to jump straight into Designer. And the first thing that I just want to quickly walk through is just the basic project file that I've set up today. So I've just set up some basic fixtures, some RGBW fixtures. I've just patched those into Designer just using DMX, and I've created 4 timelines. So I've got a red timeline, green timeline, blue timeline, white timeline. Of course, you can add more fixtures and you can patch them however you want and add whatever lighting scenes you need, but this is just a basic project file setup that I've decided to go with today. That being said, most of the programming that we're going to be doing today is going to be done within the triggers window. This is where you can access the I/O modules, pull them into your file, and then of course use the extra conditions, triggers or actions that are associated with that I/O module to give your programming the ability that you want. So I/O modules, as I've already said, extend the functionality of Pharos, and they do that by adding in more triggers, conditions and actions. And they should be thought of as a kind of software plugin that gets embedded into the system. We have lots of I/O modules within our library. You can access them just by going up to the top here, clicking on scripts and modules, and of course just making sure that the modules tab here is selected. Once you've done that, you will have a list of I/O modules that come with the install of Designer. You can see those in the unused modules, or if there are any existing IO modules that you have in your project file, they will come under the Project Modules tab. If you want to download more, or if you want to update the IO modules, just simply click Download. That will then bring up a list of IO modules that are online, and you can of course then just select the IO module that you want and you can download it. You will notice that they have a version next to them, and then you also have an existing version, and the existing version is essentially just what you have at the moment. So you'll see that there's a couple, for instance, the Philips Hue one, which has the existing version of 1.6 that needs to be updated to 2.0. So make sure that you've got the latest AccuWeather IO module. That's the IO module we're using today. And that appears under the web services. Just make sure it's checked, and then you can go ahead, click download, and then that'll download that straight to your file. So once you've selected the IO module, you can click new. So if I just take another IO module, you can see that I can click new there. And then that will then pull that project IO module into your project. And once you've done that, you'll be then presented with two different windows. So with the IO module that we're looking at today, the AccuWeather IO module, the first set of configuration options that we have is simply a name, an API key, that's the license key. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And then finally, you have a location. That's for where you want to make the weather request for. I've picked London because that's the city I'm currently in, but it could be Paris, wherever you want. And then finally, you have a unit of measurement. So that could be metric or imperial. And also the IO module has the ability to make forecasts. So you can pick a forecast time frame. Over to the right, you have the IO module documentation. So there's documentation for each IO module within our library, and that'll just give you a couple of hints as to how best to configure it and any exterior information that you need. So one of the things that I've mentioned so far is the use of an API key. Because this is an online service, we need to obtain a license, and you can do so just by clicking on the link here, which says AccuWeather Developer Website. And once you've done that, that'll then take you to this web page in front of you. The first thing that you'll need to do is just register for the online service. It's very simple to do. Just click on the register box at the top, and then you'll have to fill out the following form. Once you've done that, that'll send you a confirmation email, pretty standard stuff, just confirm, and your account will be activated. Once you've done that, you can simply go ahead and you can log into the service. Once you've logged into the service and you're on the website and you're up and running, the first thing that you'll need to do is create an application for the IO module. So if you click on My Apps, on the right-hand side, you'll see this little box that says Add New App. You're going to want to go ahead and click that. And then just fill out the following information. So I'm going to call this Pharos Webinar. Now, what I should probably explain to you is the different types of licenses that you can get. There is a free license that allows you to make up to 50 weather requests a day. But if you need to make more requests than that, or if you need to deploy this over multiple sites, then you may want to look into the paid options. All of the information is on the website. Just be aware that the free license will only allow you to make 50 weather requests a day. Once you're done with that, though, you can then fill out the following form. Just put in the different types of application options that you want, and then go ahead and create an app. Just wait for that to load. And there you go. Your application has now been created. So once that's been approved, you'll probably get a confirmation email that will come through and telling you it's all been set up. But the all-important key for the license will appear underneath. So just go ahead, copy and paste that into Designer in the API key box, and that's it. You should be pretty much set up, ready to go. So once you've done all that and you've got the AccuWeather service license key set up, you're then going to need to start embedding that into your programming. So specifically, the IO module comes with a couple of different triggers and actions. The triggers that it will come with allow you to request everything from atmospheric conditions, wind conditions, current conditions, temperatures, and also make a forecast. You can then have various triggers that will be fired once the data is returned. And again, as you can see on my screen, I've got atmospheric conditions, wind conditions, temperature, forecast. But there's also one that I'm going to introduce for the current conditions. So I'll talk a little bit more about why I've set up these triggers in a little while. But for now, I just want to make a very simple request, which is going to allow us to populate the information and the data coming back from the service. So I'm also going to just quickly set up a very basic soft trigger. This is a trigger that can be fired from the web interface just for testing purposes. And then the action I'm going to associate with that is to request the current conditions. So now that that's been set up, I can quickly go ahead and test that the IO module is working just by simply firing that trigger. And what we should see is a lot of data being returned to the controller, and that will then appear in the web interface, which I'll show you in a little while. So I'm just going to go ahead and upload this to the controller. Okay, that's been uploaded, brilliant. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have a quick look at my triggers page within the web interface and also the IO module instances page within the interface. So I've got two pages side by side here. So the soft trigger that I've just created should request the current conditions. And there you go. You can see on the left-hand side now that we have all of this information returned via the online service. So we can see that today in London, it's actually quite pleasant for once. It's mostly sunny, but it is quite a chilly day outside. And it'll also give you various other bits and bobs of information, such as the temperature, visibility, and pressure. Okay, so this is good. We've got the information back to the system. We know that we can successfully make a request to the service and get data back, but now we want it to make a decision on what type of lighting scene to play back, depending on what type of weather we've got outside. So I'm just going to go back into Designer. I'm going to go back into the triggers view. I've got my soft trigger here, which will request the current conditions. And when the current conditions are received, it will fire the receive current conditions trigger up here. Now, you will need to make sure that you pick a weather type from the drop-down options within the trigger. We know that it's mostly sunny at the moment, so I'm just going to have a quick look for that. There you go, mostly sunny. Just as a test, I'm going to attach a timeline to it. So what should happen is I fire the soft trigger from the web interface. This doesn't have to be a soft trigger, by the way. It could be like, a real-time trigger or an astronomical trigger. But that will then request the current conditions. And when the current conditions are returned, if the weather matches the weather conditions, which I've picked in the triggers view, it should obviously then start the relevant timeline. So let's just go ahead and give that a go. Hopefully that'll work. Just upload that to the controller again. Just bring up the controller's web UI. I'm just going to refresh these pages as well. So fire the soft trigger. Okay, it's come back with the relevant information. We know that the request has been made. And there you go. We can see that it's returned the mostly sunny weather type. And of course, that's then started my first timeline. So this is really useful. But as you probably can imagine, there is a lot of weather conditions here which we'll need to match in order to make sure that we always do some kind of playback whenever a weather type is returned. So what I'm probably going to do is I probably normally set up 3 or 4 triggers, first of all. So I have one fire when it's mostly sunny. Maybe I'll have another one for when it's rainy. Maybe I'll have another one for when it's cloudy. And maybe I'll have another one for when it's snowing. So obviously those 4 weather conditions, if they're returned, will start the relevant timelines. Probably should change that to timeline number 4. But in case none of the weather conditions that are returned match what's in our programming, we can, of course, just use the any option. And this will then always jump to a default timeline. So the programming will work a little bit like this, just as a summary. We'll fire the soft trigger. It will go on to the online service. It will request the current conditions. That will then get returned to our controller. If it is sunny, it will start timeline number 1. If it is rain, it will start timeline number 2. If it's cloudy, it starts timeline number 3. If it's snowing, it starts timeline number 4. If we get a weather type that's returned that doesn't match any of those previous conditions, we will, of course, start the default timeline. One other thing that I should probably notice as well is quite important that you put this to the top of your triggers so that this fires first and then any other triggers fire afterwards. And that just means that the default timeline will start first, and then obviously if it matches any triggers lower down, then it will fire those. And that's just an ordering thing that runs concurrently throughout our whole triggering system. I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to upload that again. Obviously, it'll start the same timeline because the weather hasn't changed within the last couple of minutes, but probably worth a test. I'm just going to request the current conditions. And you can also see that all of the information is then returned here within the log, as well as the IO module instances page. So that's just a very basic overview of how that trigger works. But of course, as I've mentioned before, you can use other triggers as well within the system, and you can combine them. We have the ability to fire a trigger when atmospheric conditions are returned. So that would be visibility, humidity, pressure, which you can see all populates within the right hand side. These work in ranges. So, if the humidity is between 0 and let's say 10%, we could get it to do something. If we just wanted to leave the other properties completely open, we just set a low value of 0 and the highest value we possibly could. And then obviously it will always make sure that that part of the trigger matches. And it's the same for the wind conditions as well. We've got a similar kind of workflow in that you have kind of a min and max value range in which you can configure to set a bandwidth for that trigger. So I hope you guys found that useful and informative. If you guys have any other questions, then obviously please do let us know. I believe that I'm going to just quickly hand over to Baz, and Baz can then answer or put forward any questions.
Let me just join in. I mean, there was one question from, well, first of all, thanks, Ryan. There has been one question from James about the location. What locations are you allowed to fill in? And if people open up the Q&A window at the bottom, you'll see the link to the AccuWeather website, which is listing which exact locations are supported by this system. And of course, we're very open to see if there's any other questions. If you want, just open up the Q&A window at the bottom and start typing a question. And I see we just received another one. Or raise your hand if you'd like to talk. And I think, Ryan, you can see the questions as well. Would you like to maybe answer them just verbally?
Sure.
Or,
so is there a similar API for surf reports, i.e. Magic Seaweed? I'm going to be completely honest, Jamie. I don't know the answer to that question. Possibly, I suppose it sounds like you may have already found one. One thing I probably should just point out, which may help in this question. The way that this whole system works is that the controller will make what's called a HTTP request to the online service. So for people who haven't heard of that term before, when you go onto Chrome and let's say you do a search on Google, your computer makes a HTTP GET request, and it's basically requesting information. It's going and getting information, and then that information is returned to the controller. So this is a protocol that we use quite a lot. We actually have our own HTTP API for triggering the system, but we can also make HTTP requests to online services as well. So although I'm not aware of that specific API, if it supports HTTP, then of course, I'm sure that there would be a way that we can implement that into the system. If you want to send us the details of that, we could potentially look at whether or not it'd be compatible. Maybe it's something that we can look at developing in the future. Obviously, I can't make any promises, but we're always looking to expand our IO module library. And we'll at least be able to give you some idea as to whether or not it's possible.
Yeah. Maybe to expand to this one, we, for example, have an IO module that is checking the water temperature for some Australian reefs. And that's, I guess, because some people tend to surf and dive over there. So yeah, as Ryan mentioned, we can't make any promise at this moment, but we are very open to make additional IO modules if they make sense for you, which, for example, use surf reports.
Yeah. So Brian asked a question: any ability to utilize weather advisory or emergency weather conditions? So I'm gonna be really honest with this one, and I'm gonna say that the IO module currently does not support emergency broadcast, because in fact the way that the IO module works is we need to poll the information. It's not sent to us. I believe the AccuWeather service does have something for these kind of emergency reports, but it's not embedded with the IO module. So obviously they have that API. If you are an experienced programmer and it's something that you think you can tackle, and I think Brian is we've spoken before, and I think he's a very capable programmer, this might be something that you may potentially want to look at. So the service is obviously there for you to use yourself, but it's not something that's currently supported within the IO module. No. Ali asks a question: does IO module a hardware or just software? IO modules are just software based. So obviously the whole Pharos ecosystem is a hardware based control system. So the designer software is used for just commissioning the system. It's just used for configuring and creating programming for the controllers. The controllers actually do all of the processing. That being said, the IO modules are like software plugins for the hardware. So just to be really clear, IO modules are free to download from our website. They're software plugins that you can pull into Designer, but ultimately that information, that code is then being uploaded to the controller, and then the controller is running the physical process. So they are software plugins that run on the Pharos hardware. Can this be used with VLC? Yes. So our IO module library should be, or IO module library can be used with any controller. So TPC, LPC, obviously VLC as well. There's nothing to stop you from using it. Obviously, the VLC works a little bit differently. I'm not going to go into too much of that now, because I believe that is something that we'll be looking at in future webinars. But yes, it will be able to start and stop playback, and you'll be able to use it within the triggers and actions within Designer. So yeah, that's not a problem.
Great. Well, I think if there are further questions, people are welcome to ask them, but I expect at this moment there's no further questions on people's minds, or at least not regarding this topic. So I guess we'll be rounding up. Of course, you can always ask a question to us via support@pharoscontrols.com afterwards. Ryan, thank you again for doing this presentation. Everybody, thank you for joining. After this webinar, you will receive a small survey where you can provide feedback and also suggest topics for future webinars, because your feedback is very much appreciated. And with this, we'll be ending the webinar. So we'd like to thank you for your attendance, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you.